Consider Cannabis is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
How do you act so normal in a disgustingly and radically neurotypical world? That's what cannabis allows me to do.
It's time to consider cannabis. I'm your host, Curtis. This is the 34th episode, and this week we'll be talking to a former pastor who wishes to simply go by Buddy. A lot has happened on my personal journey since recording this episode. And during that time, I have been reminded of simple truths that have a big impact on life. Trauma is everywhere, and most people have some form or another in their story. But with trauma comes fear, anger, sadness, frustration, a lost sense of identity, the inability to make sense of the world around you, and an overall loss of internal peace. Now, it's no secret that I believe the greatest teacher to ever walk the earth was Jesus of Nazareth. And he teaches that our words and actions are an overflow of what we have stored up in our hearts. And when trauma occurs in our life, we are left with a choice: to deal with it or to put it aside and try to forget about it. If we choose to forgo healing and hold on to the past, telling ourselves that it wasn't that bad, or you deserved it, or to just get over it, we sabotage ourselves. By not sorting through the memories and putting all the events where they belong mentally and emotionally, we inevitably store it all up in our hearts. And if we choose to not forgive, our unforgiveness will fester and become toxic to all our relationships. I do not know how I would have been able to process and appropriately file away this history of mine without using cannabis. And as a Christian, it may seem as though I should just be saying that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and not give any credit to the plant God created. But I do both. My wife Sally and I have started a podcast called Arise and Abide, a daily devotional, which has been an amazing experience to participate in. If you're looking for something to try on the spiritual level, we'd love for you to give us a listen. But either way, I hope at the very least you give yourself some grace today, and extend that grace to the people around you. But now it's time to join Buddy, and we'll consider cannabis together. When was your first experience with cannabis?
Well, it was only about 5 years ago. Before that in my life, I had never even considered it as an option. It was just something wrong and illegal that bad people and druggies did. And I thought of myself as the person whose job it was professionally to model for people what supposedly Christianity was.
Was that for your whole life? Ever since you were a kid, you were a good kid?
Pretty much. I mean, I did have a little rebellious teenage phase. It didn't include any marijuana or illegal things in any way, because I just was a good kid and, I just didn't know anybody. I didn't have any connections. All my friend groups were church kids, and that just wasn't an option. College, we got into home brewing. I tried drinking, but I always hated it. I always hated alcohol. It made me feel sick. It didn't provide any relaxation. It just kind of felt like poison to me. And now I can't even take a drink without getting nauseous.
Did your parents ever take time to talk to you about drugs? Just say no or anything like that?
Not directly, but it strongly implied that quote unquote drugs equals bad and evil, period, end of story. Don't do drugs, okay? Drugs are bad. And as it became the national discussion, and whenever maybe 10 years ago people were talking about it, there were moves to start medical, and you get curious about that and wonder, is there anything to this? Probably mid-30s, my life was falling apart. I had some churches closed down, sort of like that you had mentioned in your story. I had a marriage that was falling apart. I've always had depression and anxiety. It was kind of a lowest point, and my ex-brother-in-law had some connections to that sort of thing, and he got me just a tincture with CBD, and I tried that, and I thought, I don't really feel anything. Then I had an opportunity for some internet friends. They had some access, and they came over and had real high THC actual marijuana, and my feeling was, within 5 minutes, well, it was two things very distinctly I remember. One is, wow, this is way different than anything I've ever had. This is not like being tipsy on alcohol. This is not like all the chemical benzos and antidepressants and all the kind of stuff. Two was, why in the world is this illegal and so stigmatized in our society because it allows your mind to process and put things in perspective and say, maybe there is a reason to live. Maybe there is more in this world than just constant people out to get you and attacking you and tearing you down. I was in a very emotionally abusive marriage, just talked down to and sort of disrespected all the time. And I just saw that weight on me. But yet when medicated, I'm like, you know what? I can see this in a broader perspective. I'm on the autism spectrum. And so it may seem like common sense to people, but some of the basic ways that people get around in this world and how they interact, it's very difficult to wrap your hands around just with the natural wiring and chemistry of my brain. But that first experience was just the stereotypical mind blow. Wow. I feel like I'm in a different time or different place. And I felt like, oh, here's the high me. And I realized the high me actually is capable of doing so many things with people. And it is capable of having a connection and sharing feelings and really being open with others. That was always extremely hard. I can have all sorts of thoughts that are not just, random silly high thoughts, but actually cognizant, meaningful revelations and understandings of just human nature. You can connect with people and other people going through life, and they're experiencing the same sorts of things, and how to express my feelings to them to have some sort of human connection. And I realized it's possible as a way that can be used when you don't have that connection with people and have a great difficulty with it. Very quickly, and as I was working through all my personal mental health issues, I realized that it's not just an escape or a way to have fun, like purely recreational, because you can take so much of what you learn about yourself and others and apply it to the rest of your life when you're not medicated. And you begin to look at the world. In fact, I would even go at mental exercise of like, okay, how would I interact with these people if I was a little high right now? I'd smile, I'd look at people's eyes. I don't normally smile or look in people's eyes and things. I talk about information because that's what I'm good at. I'm good at understanding things and teaching things. But I suppose you'd say my intelligence quotient is very high, but my EQ, my emotional quotient, as they say, is quite low, very low. And it's been a continual process over years and years to do that. And that does relate very much to specifically how it can be used for people on the autism spectrum. Because even from the very beginning of all the different hyperboles and people say, oh, it cures everything, one thing you really can't disagree on is it helps something in the mind with people on the autism spectrum. It helps with the epilepsy associated to that. We're not sure of the exact mechanisms, but I see that as a great opportunity. I hope and pray there will be a day when people that are on the autism spectrum have continual social problems their entire life. I can't even go through a fast food drive-through because I'll try to analyze all the prices and exactly what's the best value and why is one piece of cheese 30 cents more and the other piece of cheese 40 cents more. My mind's racing and all this data and information and trying to process the world very intellectually and almost sterilely. That does relate to a point I have that I often use to describe how it is I have tried and continue to try to interact with the world. Because by all outward standards, I'm a intelligent, capable, well-adjusted adult man. I have graduate degrees. I have done dozens of funerals and talked to people at their deathbed and at meetings and Bible studies and done all sorts of normal, seemingly extroverted, pastory things, as I like to say. But every time I had to do any of that, it took so much effort. Like if I would do one little old lady visit and then go in my room and shut down and cry for 3 hours. Or doing church in the morning, it had me catatonic for 2 days. Just so much pressure. And of course, at that point, I wasn't using. I didn't know what marijuana was. And so it just became a daily struggle. And I was just crashing and burning in my life and unable to see any hope, unable to see any picture for my future other than just continued misery. But the cannabis allowed me to visualize in my head a reality in which that's not the only thing. As a pastor, I thought I was good at talking about heaven and Jesus and eternity and your sins are forgiven and it'll be great in eternity. But I couldn't even begin to tell you how that could apply to regular life, because the only thing I knew about regular life was suffering and being ostracized and being bullied and being told that I'm saying the wrong thing and wearing the wrong thing and acting the wrong way, and just constantly being attacked for anything that was contrary to the social norms. And I found that the only people that I could really see eye to eye with, at least metaphorically, were other people that use cannabis. Maybe they didn't believe the same thing as me, but they could still talk like human beings, not in terms of the good people and the druggies. And I realized that's not a real distinction.
That first time, was that specifically for a medical
That
treatment
was just sort of out
or?
of curiosity more than anything. I was just so paranoid that the second I touched it, it would be in the newspaper on the front page the next day. Somebody would hear about somebody that I would be thrown out of my church, forced out of town, and just lose everything. But more and more I realized, you know what, I've already lost everything. What's to lose? I'll try this weird, strange thing. And it was this wonderful thing that I've done emotionally. Because, I'm still obviously in the dark journey, but I've grown and developed so much. And, I went through my divorce and I lost everything. I moved back home and stayed in my parents' bedroom, the whole kind of divorced dad kind of thing, or divorced middle-aged guy. But then I found more and more, you know what? This doesn't have to be some shameful habit that you hide, and you have a druggy friend and you can go have your joint and your pot and get stoned. My dad, for example. That's still how he sees it. It's just an evil thing that evil people do, like meth or shooting up heroin or anything else.
Any thought that maybe this might be good for me because of my autism or other emotional issues I'm going through?
It was certainly curious about the medical implications, because so much of the national discussion at that time, I didn't think it would be recreational. I thought it would just make you drunk and stupid. I've been drunk a few times and I hated it. And I used to perform as a musician and done all sorts of bars and clubs and different things. And I just couldn't stand drunks. I still can't stand drunks. They're annoying. They go and they grab your guitar and they talk too loud. And I had nothing in common socially with sort of the bar crowd. I still don't.
They like to get close.
Yes, talk right in your face with really bad breath. But then again, you hang out with people that are quote unquote stoners, and they just want to sit and have deep conversations. You're encouraged to just talk about things, and they're encouraged to listen to what you want to say. I'm like, wow, this is an environment in which I can prosper. I think I'd be a good stoner. Whatever the implications of the term are, I'm starting to find, you know what? I can see this is a place in my life where I can feel like I'm starting to get my things together. And I can actually go from just being burnout and bitter about the church and religion and wanting to hide every time I see a little church lady somewhere, to where I'm like, you know what? If this was more socially acceptable, I could just sit around with other people, have a reasonable amount of cannabis, and then actually have counseling or Bible study or anything else that requires all that actual interpersonal give and take.
The medical board denied autism and anxiety as qualifying.
I can, again, speaking devil's advocate, I think the concern is, well, anybody can just go and say I have anxiety. Because everybody can just go to the doctor, say that I have anxiety, and boom, here's some SSRIs, here's some different antidepressants, here's some benzos, just take this, you'll feel better. Whereas with cannabis, it's, we need to make sure they're not a druggie and make sure they're not going to enjoy it. You can have it, but it better be only medicine. You better not be happy, because then it's just people trying to get drunk or stoned, metaphorically. And so they're trying to, again, politics always have to talk out of both sides of the mouth. They have to appease the people and assure them, oh, no, we would never give something to somebody just for recreational. We want to make sure it's legitimate. It has to be something nasty that frightens people, like AIDS or cancer. Then it's okay, because we can justify it to the grumpy old ladies and old timers who don't get it. Again, that's me being devil's advocate. Whereas coming from the perspective of somebody who has actually benefited very much, I don't want to use the trope or the overly used thing that, it saved my life. But in a lot of ways, it gave me a new perspective. It opened up the future. it helped me realize that I'm not just a burnout and a failure, because that's what I was being fed from the quote unquote failure of my professional career.
Throughout your life, you've dealt with anxiety and depression. Did you talk to your family doctor about those sorts of issues?
I don't know when I first started on antidepressants, probably my mid-20s. No, it was even before that. Even when I was in grad school, I got married at 21. And even at that time, I would see counselors and just talking for me, because I was all about, this is the information. Tell me if I'm right or tell me if I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I want a logical argument, point A, B, C, D, exactly why. And I'll tell you point A, B, C, D, exactly why you're wrong and why I'm right. And let's talk about that. And of course, it comes across as arrogant and distant, whereas it couldn't be further from the truth. I just yearn and want to have some connection where I can actually help people. I want to have a genuine and real communication about actual things. I don't care about small talk. And I very sharply delineated fact and emotion, thinking and feeling. I could act normal, quote unquote normal, but how do you act so normal and look so regular and extroverted and whatever in a disgustingly and radically neurotypical world that just tortured me to no end? I became bitter and hateful to anybody that was unable to express themselves logically using provable and logically consistent arguments. I was always distant, but I felt like I never had that. That's what cannabis allows me to do. I can do what I've always wanted and have never been able to do, which is simply to be able to sit and talk to people without being afraid and thinking and my mind rushing and worrying about everything and just melting down and going to a useless blob after trying to have social interaction. And therapists, when you go to see a therapist and talk about your feelings and go through all that process, whatever it may be, it was always very ineffective for me in my pre-cannabis days. But actually counseling and doing therapy can be so beneficial if you have some cannabis to break down those walls and allow yourself to be in an emotionally receptive state. And so many people with trauma, PTSD specifically, borderline or recurrent thoughts or nightmares or the thousands of mental health things that people deal with. These are things that are so terrifying to people that they shut down and can't open themselves up and can't talk to a counselor about. What if we just tried, sit down with some people, sit down with a counselor, everybody have a little bit and see where it goes? And that within the mental health community, it's still very taboo, just as it is within the church community. But what I see as something that I can contribute meaningfully in my life and from my position is both pressing to at least consider and have conversations about how this can function in everyday Christian life, but two, how it can relate to and benefit the field of mental health in general.
Can I ask you, what are some of the things that you worry about when you're starting to spiral?
Yes, it's usually about, did I do something to be offensive and have everybody angry at me? Did I pick my nose or something? Did I say the wrong thing? Because I'm not good at reading crowds and social cues. And I can't tell if the person I'm talking to is like kind of vibing with me and understanding where I'm going, or they're just secretly fuming, how dare I say that or do that? And so people were always getting offended around me. And it didn't help that I had an unpleasant marriage where I was constantly being told, you embarrass me. I can't be seen in public with you. She stopped going to church. She stopped doing anything related to me because she didn't want to be seen with me because I was, quote unquote, retarded or mentally ill or crazy or whatever, even to the point, well, I think people are afraid of you. Somehow that I have this strong negative energy where I like bully over people. And partly it's true because I just don't know. And rather than try to sit to interpret and sort of parse this really strange unspoken law that governs all of neurotypical society, it's easier to just say, screw it. I'm just going to be me and be who I am. But you can't in general. But I think more and more, I feel like I can be more true to myself. I can just be me and I can accept people at face value. I keep going back to an expression I use. If you want to understand how it's like being in this mind, specifically without cannabis, it's like I run the same operating system as everybody. I can work in Windows or whatever people are using. But for most people, it's installed natively. It's part of the BIOS. It's how they think and how they're wired. For me, everything I have to do with social interaction is played within a virtual machine. It is emulated on another operating system, put over top and translating all these emotional social cues into purely logical streams of data to be interpreted by my brain. And then I make a performance outwardly based on what I think would cause the best results. Very, very abstracted and logic-based. And it's extremely draining. The capability to have that human connection is there, but it's been damaged. Whereas I feel like with cannabis, I can do it more naturally. Severe depression is a mental illness. It's an inability to properly feel pleasure that most people can do, but some people have a deficiency. And you're supplementing a deficiency in such a way, you're not trying to run away from your problems and be drugged out in an alley somewhere. You're trying to be, we use the term high-ductive. Things with depression and anxiety are so difficult, like do a few dishes, throw away some trash, go to work, to hours and hours of dreading and forcing and agonizing in your soul over even tiny things, whereas you can just be high and just do it. Just be in the moment. I'm not high right now, but when my mind gets going, it's sort of like I'm high, because then I'm engaged and I'm in a flow. But it's very, very difficult for me to get engaged and be in a flow. And I am glad I can start to do that now, even without it. But it takes so much work and a lot of time. And cannabis is like an assistant. And it helps me realize something so simple, but I repeat it to myself every day, that depression is letting the past control your present. And so you're not able to exist properly in the present because of all the baggage and darkness of the past. Whereas anxiety is letting the future control your present. And as you probably hear all over in the psychological community, one of the keys to mental health is mindfulness. Being able to be in a moment just for that moment. What am I doing? Who's around me? How can I connect? What things could I create? What great things could I write or say that would be very meaningful and very significant in the world right now? And that is something that most people take for granted, or they'll just take a few deep breaths and just be in the moment. It is so difficult because you have these twin beasts of depression and anxiety, one attacking you from behind and one lurking around the next corner.
My dad told me once that if you have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, you're pissing on the present.
I like that way of expressing it for sure. My family is all from the South, and I remember going to my grandparents' house, and they would just kind of be hanging out in the living room, and Aunt Susie or the grandkids or people would just stop by, and they'd hang out for a while, and they'd talk to mom and dad, and they'd do their thing. Maybe they'd have dinner, and then they'd go. And the house was a very cool, positive place. It was like a social hub. People just show up and they'd say, "Hi, how you doing?" And I always really envied that because I grew up where nobody comes to the house. You don't have visitors because it's a huge, terrible, stressful thing. My parents both have depression and anxiety too, and had all sorts of issues with that, where everything has to be serious and everything has to be structured and very military. You can't just hang out with people. Where I realized it's not a sinful and evil thing to hang out and share your feelings with people, and to talk and form connections, even to have religious discussions, to actually use it to grow your faith and to support those around you. It's not suddenly you've done this moral thing, here you're having an orgy in church at the same time. It's not that at all. Because fundamentally, it's all about just human beings with minds are in a world with other human beings with minds. And you always ask yourself, well, how do I make this experience, this walk through life meaningful? Mentioned before that I could preach all about heaven and eternity and yes, it'll be great and wonderful and awesome, but I had no idea how to relate that to now because I didn't crave human interaction. I began to be afraid of it. Somebody's offended. Somebody's whispering about me. Not in like a schizophrenic paranoia thing, but just sort of in I have no idea. And it happens from time to time. And so my default is just to assume whenever I'm in a group of people, there's going to be a few people pointing and whispering at each other about that awkward, weird guy or the guy who talks too loud in public.
Do you feel like that was your experience growing up throughout your life? That's been you?
That's been me. I've always been the weird outcast, the person who, when I was 8, I felt and seemed more like I was 40. And I just never understood other kids, even when I was a kid. And I was picked on and beat up and bullied. The only time I felt like kind of part of other kids, I was in a gifted program with other people that were highly intelligent and quite possibly on the autism spectrum themselves. This is just sort of random numbers out there, but if there's a certain disparity in intelligence levels, maybe 30, 40, 50 points or something, it's almost impossible to have a conversation where you're on the same wavelength and where you get what they're saying and they get what you saying. And I felt like the average person, it's very difficult for me to have any kind of interaction when people want to talk about, I like Ford, Chevy trucks, I like this, I like pro wrestling, I like this, just things that normal people talk about. I would think, how is that interesting? Like sports, how could sports possibly relate to anything? It's simply people hitting each other and doing physical things without any engagement of the mind whatsoever. And I would make these vast overgeneralizations. Good is thought and bad is this feeling manipulative world. And it feels manipulative because I don't know what people are whispering or when people give me a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Speaking of, the way that you had to, thankfully, more, when it was completely illegal in black, you had to kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, a guy that has a little connection here and, we won't talk about it. Or, hey, you want to go out to the parking lot kind of stuff? I never understood that. I hung out with friends who were stoners. I had no clue they were stoners because they would just go to the parking lot a lot. And I thought, okay, maybe they have to talk about something important. They'd come in and they were just nice, happy people and they accepted me in their group. But I was the upstanding member. I was the pastor. I was the one who should be ashamed to be hanging out with these musician types. As I said, I played in rock bands to kind of fund my way through grad school. I just sort of did it because it's fun. Music is the one thing where I can most easily just get into my flow and communicate my feelings and just pour out my heart and have a connection with an audience.
Bass, drums, guitar? What?
Yes.
All of it?
Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, the subtle things, if I wanted to try weed, I wouldn't even know how to ask for it. Excuse me, sir, do you have any marijuana which I may purchase from you with my money? Here is the money. Would you like to have a financial transaction for marijuana? And of course, to that, anybody would say, what are you talking about? You're crazy. I really don't know any other way to talk other than directly. I don't know how to use grammar and human language apart from communicating a message that is consistent with the words themselves.
Knowing that about yourself is half the battle.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what I've been in my journey, if you want to use words like that. I've been more and more able to accept that and to become less ostracized like an alien. That's a common idiom with kids with autism and adults, that you're an alien, you're from another planet, you're from the wrong planet. That's one of the major websites, Wrong, the Planet. And I figured, I'm not on the wrong planet. I'm a human too. I just have to find a way to communicate with other humans that don't communicate in the same way that I do.
Well, when I look at the Bible, when I look at the garden, when I look at the intended outcome for humanity and what we were supposed to do, how we were supposed to interact with each other, what society should look like in a world that does have business but doesn't have the corruption the way we have it and the greed the way we have it. It almost seems to me like there's people who are more sensitive to the way it was supposed to be, and then when they look at just this chaos and this mess that's out the window, I don't know how to interact with it because it's not supposed to be like this. And I know it's not supposed to be like this. Yeah. And I don't know how to be what I'm supposed to be in that, because that is not the way it's supposed to be.
And what you said is very characteristic of people with high-functioning autism. And the words have changed over the years in the DSM, but basically it means it's not behaviorist. It's not whether you can do the normal behaviors and get a job and get married and pay your taxes and bills, which I'm kind of bad at all those things, but I can do them. It's not about whether you can. And this is why it's so hard to pin down. It's about how your mind processes things. And rather than see it, here's this guy that gets high. Ooh. Rather, it's leveling the playing field. Where most people are on a similar plane where they kind of get each other and I'm out here in left field, marijuana makes me more on the same level. makes me do what normal people can do with less effort and more natural, in such a way that I can include emotion but not let myself be emotionalist, not be carried away by it. And it goes back to that deficiency thing where I can use it, and it can be used responsibly. I believe that there are some people that are just marijuana addicts. I know one guy in particular, he cannot function unless he's really, really medicated. Like, he has to get up in the morning and have like 3 joints, and before that he's nasty and disgusting and horrible and abusive, and then he's fine and calm, and then it wears off a few hours later, and if he doesn't have 3 or 4 more joints, I realize that's a thing. And when you're speaking in a, especially a religious and Christian context, people are very worried about that. Oh, you're just going to be an addict, you're going to use it, and you have the scriptures about how you use your Christian freedom and all the discussions that Christians have about whether you can have alcohol or not. And I think most people realize that the reasonable answer is to be used in moderation in such a way that it helps you and not hurts you. A way that, you have a few drinks, and if that helps you connect with your friends and celebrate. Wine in the scripture is always associated with joy and celebration, the great wedding feast, the restoration of Eden, in which people could walk with God and have joy with others and be in harmony with those around them. And it just gets you a peek of that. So alcohol in scripture is associated with celebration, and it can be used responsibly if used, in that case, not as an escape from life. And so I would say that you could put cannabis in a very similar category. You have freedom, yes, all things are lawful, but not all are profitable. But almost all things can be used profitably. There's nothing intrinsically evil about marijuana. In fact, I think for the future of medicine, it has amazing and genuinely can be seen as a blessing and a great thing. Christian freedom is, are you using this to hurt others, cause damage, and to elevate yourself above others? Or are you using it in a faithful way that's benefiting to others? How is what you're doing affecting others? And that's difficult for me psychologically and personally and spiritually.
One of the things that I would push back on you a little bit in that is the idea that someone who is a marijuana addict or just addiction in general. I know everyone's a little different, but so many people who are addicts to whatever it is are trying to escape something. And it's a truth, it's a reality, it's a trauma that they've experienced that they don't know how to deal with.
Yes.
And so when people talk about like marijuana addicts, I am more interested in how can I press into a person's life and help them see that, hey, you can have freedom. You can actually have real freedom from this, but you have to actually press into the garbage that you're trying to run from.
Well, I think that the difference in perspective that I have is that I have had to, and even continue to this very day, I'm still in contact with my denomination, and of course nobody knows that I'm an evil stoner. It's entertaining to me when you have to be sitting there in a meeting or Bible study or something when the little old lady says, I heard they're going to have marijuana in this town and there's going to be druggies around. And I just have to kind of smile and say, oh, yeah, too bad, Mrs. Jones. Yeah, you don't want any of those types here. So I'm the one who supposedly is supposed to be in league and on the same wavelength with this extremely outdated and judgmental and just almost irrelevant way that people make themselves categorically different than these other people. So they define the other thing, which is not us, as the bad thing. People might talk about xenophobia and stuff, and I don't want to get into the politics of that, but psychologically, the way it applies, and spiritually, as one who teaches Christians, I think a lot of people, if they found out my dirty secret, I would say, oh, I can't believe I actually shook his hand and was in the same room with that disgusting filth. Just hatred. If you want to see hatred, don't look for the druggies in the alley. Look for the good Mr. and Mrs. Christian on a Sunday morning. They are disgusting in how much filth and anger they pour out to you. And every problem they've had with God or with philosophy about the meaning of life is addressed on you. And what they expect you to do is to pat them on the back and make them feel better and say, you're good, you're not like those other people. And it's exactly the opposite of what I know to be true and what I genuinely believe. But in a formal setting, being a pastor or being a respected member of the community. I'm supposed to be on the side of the good guys. So I'm talking to these little old ladies all the time, over and over again, who are coming from this perspective. And the question for me, how do I bridge that gap? How do I minister to these people that have an absolutely uncompromising position about alcohol and about cannabis and about dancing and about playing cards, or insert your evil sin, not putting it in a perspective of being able to reflect on ourself and our own corruption, and to being able to take comfort in who God is and what he's doing for you right now in the present.
Well, it's hard because, I mean, you say you want to love the church lady and help her see, hey, we're not druggy. We're not trying to rob you. We're not out to ruin your family values or anything like that. But at the same time, just being who you are, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. And if we look at Jesus and his model of living, it was all about invitation and challenge. He would invite people in to follow him and to listen, and he would straight up challenge them and say, hey, you've got it wrong on this subject. Like, he absolutely laid challenge down, but they couldn't receive that challenge in a positive way without that relationship that was invested in.
Right. Yep.
So it's really hard to invest in those relationships to be able to get that kind of equity that we can put that kind of charge on them.
Right. And I think that everybody has gifts and a place and talent and things they can use, not just temporarily for the world to make money and then put food on the table, but to serve others and to actually minister and have a ministry. It's not only possible, I think it's a huge need. Whereas if your perfect little white picket fence church with everybody with their conservative values and everybody gets together and acts conservative and moral, if you can only reach out to people that want to be and want to fit that mold and be conservative and moral and have little potlucks like it's the 1950s and smile and nod and look good like the best people in the community, that's dying. You have real people in a real world that just see right through that. And what if you could actually talk to real people in a real way without the implication being, well, of course that means no marijuana, no drinking, no this, no that, no that. It quickly becomes evident that it is our desire to define ourselves in such a way that we seem better than others. Now you can feel better than others too if you do these directions.
Follow these simple steps to our brand of enlightenment.
Very good. Yes, I like that.
So we talked a little bit about being present, mindfulness. How do you achieve that in your day-to-day?
Well, certainly the standard thing is mindfulness meditation, and dialectical behavioral therapy has a lot of emphasis on mindfulness and on emotional regulation, that sort of thing. And rather than see pot as a replacement for that, it completely fits with it. Where you can, there's times when I feel so dark and confused and angry inside, I find it difficult to pray, let alone go to church. Even now, even today, I practically have a panic attack having to walk into a church and talk to people. That's horrible, but I can do it more easily and more naturally and more profitably with a little weed, frankly. And maybe if everybody sat down before a church meeting, and instead of having a beer, sometimes you hear about that, why not sit and have your church meeting, give everybody a few pokes of a joint, and then you can plan the church business. I'd go to that meeting. As it is, I have said I am never going to a church meeting ever again. I will not walk in, even if it's a volunteer. I will not be on a committee. I will not be on a board. I will not argue about finance with anybody about anything. That's not my life. What I can do, knowing myself, what I am, my core, is I am somebody who can teach. That's what I'm great at doing. And with cannabis to help with that deficiency, I can have a joint, a spliff as we call them, we mix them with tobacco. And then we can actually pray. Then we can actually focus more in worship. As heretical as it sounds, going to the church with a little bit of motivation, a reasonable amount of weed before church, it allows me to not focus on all the people around me and parse every word of the sermon and say, oh, was that properly said? Was this false doctrine? Was this right? Was this wrong? Overanalyzing everything and not actually just receiving the gifts of God's grace trying to be given to you.
Yeah, that's a good place to be able to be. Like, you need to be able to be there. That's what you go to church for.
Right.
So to go to church and then be overwhelmed by the crowds and the flashing lights or whatever you got going on in your church and not be able to receive that, it's counterproductive. You've just triggered yourself in 100 different ways, and now you're set off for the rest of the week instead of being in a good place.
Right. Yes, very much so.
As I've delved into the cannabis community, they emphasize cannabis over God and who saves, basically. Right. I was just curious how you have navigated that.
Right. Well, I think it kind of goes back to the Christian freedom of how different denominations and Christians talk about things like, is it like anything else in their life? Is it a false god that cannabis is going to make everything better? Then you're putting your fear, love, and trust in that rather than in God. Whereas you can see many things in this world as tools to help you and assist you in getting through and dealing with the realities of life in this miry clay, this valley of shadows, where you can take these things and the good things in the world, whatever they may be. I use a reasonable amount of cannabis as a way for me to get in touch with myself and the world around me. And it can be used very profitably, but it's not an end in itself. The assumption is, again, by the people that never tried cannabis but already know everything about it, the assumption is this is you making it your God. This is you making an idol of it. This is you turning against your faith, rejecting Jesus, and turning to weed and being a druggie. And because it's put in those very black and white terms, you have a sense where maybe that's all I am. Maybe I'm not cut out for this church thing. Maybe that's not me. My life will have meaning with weed, or my life will have meaning with sex. My life will have meaning with booze. And I'm going to go my own way where I can be happy. And because people are trying to find their fundamental happiness and understanding of good in the world in some sort of experience, or the beauty of the trees and the little birdies, rather than realizing that for Christians, it's always been that our identity is outside of ourselves in being part of the body of Christ and what God has done for us, externally not being curved inwards, as they'd say, of the sinful nature, not to get too technical, but rather looking outwards and seeing the needs and the desires of others is more important than your own. So I guess the question is why and how? There's never a simple answer. People always want a simple answer. Alcohol's okay, you can have 2, but can't have 3. 2 is good, 3 is sinful. When you put lines on these things to define them, it's so people can define themselves rather than seeing them as a way to reflect on how God has already defined you. And that's a profound difference. I don't think most people think about that, though. And so they themselves fall into the black and white thinking. I'm one of those druggies. I think I'd rather live as a sinner. I'd rather be in hell and my friends than in heaven with all them tightwads. They allow themselves to be painted, maybe subconsciously, by this same dichotomy that is so prevalent in American Christian culture. American Christianity has been infused with this Puritan understanding of morality. The good people and the bad people, the saved and the unsaved, the Christians and the marijuana users. Even if people have no religious faith and haven't been to church in years, you still have the idea, oh, this chocolate cake is so good it's sinful, right? There's either bad pleasure or good pleasure. And it's not about who Jesus is and what he's done for us. It's all about defining and making yourself stand up and look good in the world. The one secret to success in American culture is to suck up to the right Protestants. Make yourself look as the person who goes to church. Even all the presidents, the presidents have to make sure they're seen on TV going to church because still at American, that's what the good people do.
Well, buddy, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to say to anyone considering cannabis?
I would say absolutely. Just try it in a safe place among supportive friends, just to see what the experience is like. Just to be open-minded and realize you're not being a druggie, but you're trying something that could be so much better than the pharmaceuticals out there. I was prescribed by a doctor that was given to me by the state, the mental health department, to take some benzos every day. Just take one in the morning, one in the night. I got so hooked on those things when I ran out, when my insurance lost, when I didn't have it anymore. It was the worst withdrawal in my life. I would encourage people, don't touch benzos at all. If I go one day without my SSRIs, I become a nutcase. The most reactive, most irritable, horrible withdrawals. I hate that. I hate that I am, at this very moment, completely dependent on and addicted to the SSRI I'm on now. And the only time I ever felt like a real druggie, quote unquote, is when I ran out of my Ativan, and I was probably worse than heroin withdrawals. Cold sweating, just absolute ungovernable anxiety. I thought I was going to die. My heart was going to beat out of my chest. There's almost nothing worse in this life than a benzo withdrawal. So I was checking all the internet apps and calling my friends and doing everything I can, trying to find some way to get some of these drugs. I'm sad when I'm out of marijuana, but I don't have this. I need to get my next fix. This is me. This is what I found. And this may or may not help you, but that's me. Why not at least just see and just consider cannabis? And you might be amazed, and you might have your mind radically changed, or if nothing else, at least be able to see from the perspective of other people so differently than you did before.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
If you would like to be a guest and share how cannabis has impacted your health and wellness, send an email to considercannabisnow@gmail.com. If you have found anything of value on this show, please share it with someone else. Remember to subscribe for free and get every new episode delivered right to your phone. Thank you for listening. Join us next time as we consider cannabis together.